It's a difficult conversation many parents never have with their college-bound children. How exactly are we going to pay for all this? But as the answer will have a deep and lasting impact on the finances of both parents and children, it's a conversation you ignore at your own peril. Here with advice is MarketWatch reporter Jillian Berman. Jillian, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Why does it seem that the part about the college conversation dealing with finances never seems to happen? Everything else is on the table, the prestige,
Right.
the location, the dorms. Why is that the one part people don't talk about?
So there are a couple of reasons. One is that parents might feel guilty limiting their students' college choice by how much it's going to cost, right? That totally makes sense. Another reason is that parents, they typically don't discuss family finances with their kids. Sometimes that's a conversation as taboo as like the sex talk, right? So, you might not want to get into how much can I, how much do I make? How much can I afford? Things like that with your student.
But it seems like this is one time when you really do have to get into that because it's just too important. Let's go over some of the critical questions that you wrote about and discuss why they're so important. First, why is it important to ask the student what he or she wants to get out of college?
Yeah, so you want to ask those questions so that they don't get distracted by some of the extraneous things that you were talking about before, prestige, what the dorm looks like, things like that. So say if you narrow down the student's true purpose to going to college to become a marine biologist, they can, look at more expensive schools that have a great marine biology program, or maybe find cheaper options that have a track record of getting kids good internships.
Right. Or let's say if you want to become a modern dancer, perhaps you don't go to a school where the tuition is $60,000 a year, because as a modern dancer, you're probably not going to be able to pay that off.
Right, exactly.
Let's say. That's something I was thinking about the other day. So what about how much parents will be able to afford? Is that an important part of the conversation?
Yeah, definitely. So parents need to think about, how much they've saved, how much they can contribute through their income each year, and how much they might be willing to borrow, which, that can be a stressful talk.
And does that part also need to include what happens if the parent loses a job or faces other unexpected financial difficulties?
Yes, definitely. So that might be a reason why you might not want to stretch your resources too far, because you never know, are you going to need to retire early because, something happens, you fall sick, you lose a job, and suddenly your college plan changes.
And as parents, you really need to do the math. If you're paying X amount for college, how much longer will you then have to work before you can retire?
Right. I think that's a question that parents and students are kind of scared to ask of themselves. And, in a lot of cases, you might, especially if you borrow, you might end up having to work, several years longer than you initially expected.
Right. Now, of course, you also need to ask, should the student help out by working, by getting a part-time job, right?
Right. So students can definitely contribute, and working is a good way to do that. Experts say about 15 to 20 hours a week is typically a good amount. Once you go beyond that, you risk you risk their grades falling. And if a student is there longer than 4 years because they failed a class or whatever, then obviously that's going to end up costing more than if they had just cut back on the work a little bit.
And then again, you also need to do the math on how much debt the student should take on and how long it might take to pay that off. Scary numbers.
Yes, scary numbers. So experts suggest students take on no more in total than they plan to make their first year out of college.
Ooh, okay.
So if a student thinks they're going to make $40,000 a year, they should only take on $40,000 in loans.
And you also say that parents forget to look into the financial aid for all 4 years. They only tend to consider the first year.
Yeah, that can be a big problem. Parents sort of work really hard to finance that first year, but if they can't make it work for the few years after that, then you sort of end up in trouble. The student has to transfer. You've spent all the money on that first year at a prestigious school, and they don't get the degree from there. So,
Jillian, all very important conversation, a very important conversation to have. Difficult questions, but they must be asked. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.